My mother handed it to me smiling, saying that I should learn to be a woman. I did, but in the cruelest way. My name is Bernice Mae Holloway. I'm 84 years old, born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. And look, there are some things that even old age can't erase from your memory. There's pain that doesn't grow old with us. It just learns to hide itself better. And today I decided to open the drawer where that pain was locked away for so long, because there are stories that, if we don't tell them, die with us. And I don't want this one to die. I was 10 years old. 10. I was supposed to be chasing butterflies, making rag dolls, laughing with the other girls in the neighborhood. But that summer, the laughter stopped for good. I remember the day exactly. My mother called me early in the morning, with that stern face she only had when something bad was going to happen. "Bernice, put on your little blue dress. We're going to pay you a visit," she said. I didn't even ask where. Children who asked too many questions in that house quickly learned to shut up. I climbed into my father's truck, all stretched out on the front seat, holding the hem of my dress tightly. The car swayed on the dirt road as if it knew I was going to be thrown out. And I was. I ended up at a place on the outskirts of Shibuya, which didn't even seem to have a name. The owners welcomed me with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. People who smile with their mouths show the danger before they even speak. My father talked to them for a while, the three of them standing on the porch. I sat on a stool, not really understanding. All I heard were choppy words: service, help, less mouth in the house. And in the end, my father came back, patted me on the head, and said, "You behave yourself, see? They'll teach you properly here." He didn't even look back. He didn't even say goodbye. And I stood there with a lump in my throat that never came out. The first thing they told me to do was take off my dress. "We don't wear good clothes to work here, miss," said the woman, whose name was Evelyn. She gave me a wide, thick brown coat that stung like corn husks. She showed me where I was going to sleep. A little room at the back, without a window, with a mattress that looked like a potato sack. There I understood that I wasn't a visitor at all. I had been left. That first night, I cried in silence. I was afraid to even sob out loud. The big house was silent too, but it wasn't that peaceful silence. It was the silence that prepares things, the kind of silence that carries the weight of those who command and those who obey. And at the age of 10, I was already learning which of the two sides I had fallen on. The next few days were tough. They started to teach me the chores: milk the cow at 5 in the morning, pick beans, sweep the big house, cook for the couple and their children. And when I got something wrong, because I did, I was just a little girl, Evelyn would say with a cynical smile, "You'll learn yet. We'll mold it right here." Her husband, Vernon, was quieter, but he had a way of looking at you that made your skin crawl, even in the southern heat. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was to scare you. "A girl needs to know her place," he would say. And every time he passed me slowly, I felt the back of my neck go cold. In the second month, I began to realize that not all orders were spoken. Some came from the look in his eyes, the way he slammed the door, the time the light was turned off earlier than usual. Evelyn looked after the house, but Vernon took care of the night teachings. And nobody talked about it. It was just understood. And I learned to understand too. You learn, you know? You learn to tread lightly, to breathe more slowly, not to look people in the eye. You learn that laughing too much attracts attention, that talking too much irritates, that being alone with him was never safe. Evelyn always disappeared at those times. She'd say she was going to bed early, that she had a headache, but she left the door unlocked. And I knew what was coming next. But I was still a child, a frightened child, but stubborn. I began to observe everything. Who came in, who went out, where they hid the keys, when the children went to sleep. And every night, as I lay on that filthy mattress, I thought, one day I'm going to leave. One day no one will tell me to shut up. But that one day always seemed too far away. And before I could think of any escape, something happened that changed everything in that house. A new girl arrived, 16 years old, from another city, also brought by someone, also delivered, only she was no longer afraid. She looked people in the eye, and that That was dangerous in that place. If you've made it this far, leave a like. Every like is like one more step for me to get this story off my chest. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, because this story needs to be heard. It needs to be heard. That night, when the new girl arrived, I was sitting on the kitchen floor, my hands covered in cornmeal, trying to understand why the flour always made my arm itch. Evelyn came in behind her, pushing with that haste that only she had when she wanted to appear helpful. "This one will help you," she said quickly, as if it were a favor and not a substitution. The girl was tall, too thin, with a scar on her neck that seemed to tell a story no one dared ask about. Her name was Jolene. She was only 16, but the look in her eyes was that of someone who had already lived 3 lives and buried each one in a different corner of her memory. I immediately found it strange. She wouldn't lower her head. She kept looking around as if she was taking stock, as if she was already choosing where she was going to run. Evelyn told her to share a room with me, and I knew that the peace, if there ever was any, was over for good. That first night, Jolene sat on the bed, crossed her arms and said, "If he comes here, I'll put the knife in." I just looked at her and thought, poor thing, she still doesn't understand how things work here. But I didn't say anything, because there, we learned that silence was also a weapon. Over the next few days, she refused to do certain tasks. Evelyn tried to laugh, but it was nervous laughter. Vernon began to spend more time in the kitchen. His presence was like smoke, sticky, hard to avoid. Jolene wouldn't lower her head even when he came in, and I could feel in my skin that this was going to cost her dearly. Before long, one afternoon, he ordered her to go and clean the stables by herself. It was his favorite excuse. I kept quiet. I didn't know whether to tell him off or say that it wasn't the place to go alone, but she went. She came back 2 hours later with a torn dress and a face as white as unbleached flour. She went into her room, sat down on the floor, and stayed there. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stayed. I sat down next to her and offered her a piece of dry bread. She took it. She ate it slowly. Then she whispered, "That was the last time," and I knew right then that something inside her had broken for good. The following week, Evelyn was different. She didn't speak properly. She walked around the house a bit crooked. She also seemed to know that something was about to snap. Jolene started disappearing when she was supposed to be in the kitchen. I covered for her when Evelyn asked. She'd say she was in the chicken coop, that Vernon had told her to do something else. I didn't even know how to lie properly, but I lied, and I lied because I saw something in Jolene that I no longer saw in myself, the possibility of leaving in one piece. She reminded me that freedom existed, even if it was only inside my head. It was on a muggy night, when the heat made the mattress feel like live coals, that she called me outside. She had a small flashlight in her hand, the kind Vernon left in the barn. "Today we're going to the back fence. I want to see if we can crawl through." I stopped. I said it was dangerous, that Evelyn could wake up, that Vernon could hear. But all she said was, "Do you want to die here, or disappear into the woods and try your luck?" We left slowly, like someone stepping into a dream. Her flashlight was flickering, but her step was firm. We reached the fence. She crouched down and tried to force the wires. "You need pliers," she said softly. We ran back, our hearts beating like drums inside our chests. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. The next day, Vernon woke up strange. He was quieter than usual. Evelyn walked around like a haunting, peeking around corners, locking doors that she'd left open before. Something had been noticed, but no one spoke. Only their eyes gave it away. 2 days later, Jolene didn't come home from work at the stable. Evelyn came to say that she had run away. She said this while stirring the pot, as if it were just another piece of news. "She's disappeared into the world." Disappeared. Better that way, she was too rebellious. But the way she spoke, and the way Vernon stood mutely in the corner, his eyes downcast, it didn't fool me. Jolene hadn't run away. Jolene had been erased. And what's worse, no one was going to look, or know, or care. My hands were shaking all day. That night, alone in my room, I could smell her gown still on the mattress, and I cried for the first time in weeks, but it was dry crying, without a sound. because even to suffer there, we learned to keep quiet. After she disappeared, things changed. Vernon became more present. Evelyn started sending me out to do chores after hours. There were days when I ate lunch without knowing if it was breakfast or dinner. One day, Vernon leaned over the edge of the sink where I was washing the dishes and said in his slurred voice, "You're the only one there now." The dishes slipped out of my hand. Not that he had said anything clear, but it was always like that. They never spoke in full. The tone was enough. The manner. The pause. After the words. I started sleeping with my chair against the door. It didn't do much good, but it gave me the feeling that I could at least listen first. Evelyn began to treat me with more, let's say, demanding. Any mistake became a reason. A badly twisted cloth, a poorly washed spoon, and I'd hear sermons that lasted for hours, but it was all an act. She knew Vernon was waiting for the right moment, and I knew it too. That's when I started planning. But this time, it was different. I didn't just want to escape. I wanted them to pay. I wanted her name, her face, not to be buried in nothing like garbage. I started listening, observing, remembering every detail, every corner of the house, every hidden key, every whisper between them. And so I began to put together my map, because the time was coming. And when it did, I wasn't going to run. I was going to make them remember Jolene. And me too. After Jolene disappeared, everything became heavier in the house. The air seemed thicker, harder to pull in, as if the place itself was trying to hide what had happened. Evelyn walked around with a cloth in her hand all the time, cleaning what was already clean, avoiding looking me in the eye. Vernon, on the other hand, seemed lighter, as if her absence had taken a weight off his back. It made me sick to my stomach. Waking up became a daily scare. I didn't even sleep properly anymore, listening to any noise as if it were the last thing before the end. And every evening, when the sun began to fade, my hands would start to sweat. The fear came without asking permission, settled in my chest and stayed there, throbbing. Evelyn would put me to work late, sometimes even after dark. I'd wash the kitchen again, even if it was clean, just so she'd have an excuse to keep me out of the bedroom. On the third night after his disappearance, Vernon came into the pantry while I was getting flour. He closed the door slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. "You're obedient, Bernice. That's good." He said it almost in a whisper, so close that the smell of him made me want to vomit. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just lowered my head, as he expected, because I knew that any reaction would be used against me later. He just wanted to know if he could still control me, and at that moment, I was. But inside, I was on fire. It wasn't fear. It was anger. From then on, I started acting differently. I disguised it, smiled more when Evelyn was around, pretended to be content. I offered to do heavy chores. I said I liked looking after the chickens, the well, chopping wood, anything to get out of the house. I wanted to observe the surroundings, decorate paths, check that the gates were still padlocked. I discovered that on Sundays, Vernon went into town to sell eggs, and Evelyn was left alone with the children. That was my window. But I wasn't going to run off into the woods like Jolene had tried. I had to make sure that when I left, they would never have another girl to put out. I started paying attention to everything. I found out where Evelyn kept the keys to the back room, in an old tin behind the glass case. I saw that Vernon kept money in an empty cookie box in the closet. I made a mental note of the way they locked the sheds, the times their children went to sleep, how long it took the dog to stop barking. Every little piece was part of the plan that I still didn't have the courage to put into practice, but which was growing inside me like a weed. One day, Evelyn told me to go to the hen house early, saying that the eggs were disappearing. When I got there, I found a piece of Jolene's coat stuck in the wire of the back fence. It was a tiny, almost invisible strand. I picked it up and hid it inside my blouse. It burned in my chest, as if it still had life in it. It was the only proof that she had existed, that she wasn't just a figment of my mind. I spent the next few days sleeping with that cloth next to me, as if it were an amulet, a promise that I would get out of there alive, but not quietly. One afternoon, Vernon came home early from the city. I was sweeping the hallway of the big house. He stopped by the stairs and stared at me for what seemed like an eternity. "Don't you miss her?" he asked. I pretended not to understand. He smiled. The rebel, the word, hurt like a knife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the broom off the floor and hit him until he never opened his rotten mouth again. But I just nodded and carried on sweeping. He laughed and walked away. That made me realize that he knew that I knew. The war had begun, and I needed to be smart. One night, I heard Evelyn crying in her room. It was a quiet, hidden cry, like someone who is ashamed even of their own pain. It didn't move me. Maybe inside she knew what Vernon was doing. Maybe she pretended not to. Or maybe it was worse. Maybe she accepted it, as long as he didn't touch his own children. It made me sick to my stomach. The worst kind of people are those who see and choose to do nothing. Those who close their eyes because opening them would force them to act. And taking action sometimes means losing comfort. They would rather keep hell quiet than lose their apparent peace. The following week, I started saving food. Pieces of bread, broken cookies, even some fruit that fell from the orchard. I hid it in a cloth bag behind the firewood near the shed. I also kept a knife, small but sharp. It was used to cut up the chickens. Nobody missed it. I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, but I had to have it, just to make sure. And then it happened. Evelyn fell ill. She caught a bad fever and wouldn't get out of bed. Vernon paced the house nervously, like a caged animal. He'd tell me to do things and then undo everything, just to tell me to do them again. One evening, he asked me to take some tea up to their room. The tray trembled in my hand, not from the weight, but from the certainty that this was the start of something. When I reached the corridor, I stopped. I left the tea there, on the floor, and I walked slowly back to my room. That morning, I sat on my bed, knife in my lap, heart pounding. If he opened the door, I'd be ready, but he didn't. He just paced back and forth, mumbling. I think his fear had changed sides, and that's when I knew. I was close. The time was coming. I wasn't going to leave like Jolene. I was going to make history. The next day, Evelyn didn't get out of bed. The fever seemed to have sapped even what little strength she had left. Vernon gradually began to lose control, as if he no longer knew how to live without someone there to balance his madness with appearances. I watched everything in silence, stirring the coffee calmly, washing the dishes slowly, measuring my steps around the house. It was as if my every move was a test, and I had to get each one right without missing a beat. With his wife in bed, he started to show up more than he should. He gave orders that contradicted each other, invented task after task, followed me around the rooms like a sticky shadow. One morning, he came into the laundry room while I was folding the cloths. He leaned against the wall and stared at me in silence, the kind of silence that says everything without saying anything. "You're growing up, Bernice." He said that and left. That was all. But the way he said it made me sick right away. I had to sit down before my legs betrayed me. The children in the house didn't seem to notice anything. They were oblivious, busy with their toys and feigned laughter. Evelyn kept moaning in her room, and I wondered if it was just the fever, or if she had decided to shut up for good. The illness had become a kind of heavy presence, which couldn't be seen, but could be felt in every corner of the house. I took care of her with the basics. I brought broth, changed the sweaty sheets, avoided staying there too long. The smell of sweat mixed with neglect enveloped me, and every time I left the room, I felt Vernon's eyes following me. That was the week I started testing the keys. I'd wait for night to fall, and once everyone was asleep, I'd sneak down the corridors. I'd take the tin behind the glass case and try it out. I locked and unlocked the front, back, and shed doors. I wanted to make sure which one fitted which lock. I took the keys with me and returned them before dawn. I did this leisurely, like someone rehearsing an escape that they still don't know is going to happen. And every night, before I went to sleep, I whispered to myself, "One more step, Bernice." One Saturday, he got more drunk than usual. He'd been stinking of alcohol since mid-afternoon. He sat in the chair on the veranda and stared at nothing. The children were playing on the floor with an old deck of cards. I collected the clothes from the clothesline as if nothing was wrong, but my whole body was tense. When the sky darkened, he staggered in, kicked over the kitchen chair and told me to bring him a plate of food. I did. I put rice and cold meat on the plate and served it as usual. He slammed his hand on the table. I said, "Hot food, miss," and he threw the plate on the floor. I didn't reply. I bent down, picked up the pieces and cleaned the floor. He watched me with anger and pleasure at the same time, as if he was waiting for me to retort. But I didn't give him the taste. I remained silent. I got up and went to the stove. I heated up another plate. I handed it to him without looking. He ate quietly, then left, stomping his feet. That night, I hid the knife inside my boot. I slept with it there, under my pillow. Something told me he was going to try, that he was close, and when he did, I had to be ready. 2 days later, Evelyn got out of bed for the first time. She was pale, her eyes were deep, but she looked less sick and more defeated. She sat down at the table, tried to eat, but didn't finish. She stared at the glass as if she were looking for her own soul inside. When Vernon came home from the sale, the two of them locked themselves in the bedroom. They argued quietly for almost an hour. I couldn't hear the words, but the tones said a lot. When he left, he slammed the door hard. He walked past me without speaking. I continued folding the sheets calmly, as if it wasn't about me. That same week, I found an old notebook in the wood store. It was hardcover, with crumpled edges. I leafed through it carefully. It was blank. Without thinking too much, I took it to my room and started writing down everything I remembered about Jolene. Every detail, how she walked, the words she said, the way she looked at anyone who tried to dominate her. I wrote down the day she arrived, the moment she disappeared, the signs that something bad had happened. It was my way of keeping alive a story that they wanted to bury in silence. If I ever left, that notebook would go with me. I started writing in it every night. I also started to write down the house's timetable, when Vernon went out, when Evelyn slept, when the children napped. The notebook became more than a memory. It became a plan. It became proof, a piece of truth that no one could steal. And by writing, I felt less afraid. It was as if each letter took a little weight off my chest. One muggy night, Vernon came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. He pulled up behind me. I felt his warm breath on my neck. I went still. "You're becoming a girl, Bernice." The sentence came with that disguised venom that only he knew how to distill. I took a deep breath. All I said was, "Yes, sir." He waited a few seconds and left. But it wasn't the last time. I knew that. The following Sunday, the storm really hit. He knocked on my bedroom door in the middle of the night. "Open up." His voice was low but firm. I was sitting up in bed, eyes open, knife in hand, heart racing. I didn't answer. The door opened slowly. He walked in. The light from the lamp made his shadow seem larger than it was. He stopped in the middle of the room. He looked at me as if he were facing a cornered animal. I shivered, but didn't move. The knife was there, in his lap. He took a step, another. When he raised his hand to touch my shoulder, I raised the blade. His hand froze in midair. He stared at me. He didn't say anything. He just left. He slammed the door. The chair against it shook with the impact. The next morning, Evelyn came to pick me up. "You're going to help out in the shed today?" Her voice was dry, her eyes dead. I followed in silence, but with the notebook tucked into my waistband, tightly bound by a cloth. Because if I were to disappear like Jolene, someone would know. But that, my dear, is only the beginning. Crossing the yard towards the shed that day was like stepping on hot coals. Evelyn didn't say anything on the way, just walked ahead, as if she was in a hurry to get rid of me. When we arrived, she pointed to the corner where the water vat was and said it needed cleaning. "Take it all out, scrub it, fill it up again, don't be lazy." And she turned away. I knew she'd only brought me there to get away from what was really going on. Vernon was on the prowl, and the silence in the house said more than 1,000 words. I began to clean slowly, but my eyes wouldn't leave the door ajar. Every creak in the floorboards made me stop and listen. The smell of old things stuck to my clothes. The sun beat down directly on my neck, but my body was somewhere else. All I could think about was the notebook hidden under the loose board in my room, the knife now stored near the food jars, and the day that would never come. The shed was damp, stuffy, and the sound of anything inside became an echo. Halfway through the cleaning, I heard footsteps outside. I stepped firmly on the dirt floor and held the canister as if it were a shield. The door opened with calculated slowness. Vernon walked in with that dirty hat in his hand, feigning casualness. "Evelyn said you needed help." I just shook my head. He approached, offering no help at all. He just stood there, leaning against the wall, watching. I felt like a trapped animal. He started talking about banal things. The weather, the chickens, the noise the pigs made at dawn. But his voice was slimy. It oozed through his skin. He pretended not to be threatening, but every word was loaded with intent. "You're smarter than the others." It was thrown out as a compliment, but it was a warning. He knew I wasn't the same. He knew I was waiting for the right moment. I finished the job without giving anyone a chance to talk. I washed my hands, turned off the tap, and left without looking back. Inside, my stomach churned. My certainty was growing. He was just waiting for me to make a mistake. Evelyn no longer asked where I was or what I was doing. It was as if she had given up pretending to care. She spent her days locked in her room or sitting by the balcony, rolling cigarettes with trembling fingers. The children, they started avoiding me. Maybe they'd heard something. Children understand more than adults think. In the evening, I started writing names in my notebook. Not just Jolene's, but the others. Yes, because over time I began to remember other girls who passed through the house. Some stayed for days, others for weeks. None of them came back. Evelyn always gave the same excuse. She ran away. She got tired of the countryside. But the truth was different. The house hungered for silence. Vernon was just the tooth of the beast. Evelyn was the stomach. One grey morning, Evelyn sent me into town with a shopping list. It was rare for me to be left alone. I took the ticket, counted out the money, and set off on shaky legs, but with my heart beating loudly in my chest. At the sale, I bought what she asked for, but before I got back, I stopped by the church and went inside, not to pray, but to leave something hidden. I wrote a quick note, talking about Jolene, the farm, what I knew. I put it inside a Bible in the third row of the right-hand pew. If anyone found it, they might do something. Maybe they wouldn't, but it was a seed. On the way back, Vernon was waiting at the gate. He didn't say anything. He just took the bags from my hand and went inside. The feeling was that he knew, not exactly what, but something. I spent the rest of the day watching his every move. When it got dark, I leaned my chair against the bedroom door harder than usual. That night was too quiet, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. A few days later, Evelyn fell again. The illness was back, or maybe it was something else. She lay in bed sweating, speaking sentences that made no sense. She started saying her mother's name, talking about her childhood, things that didn't add up. Vernon was angry, slamming doors, shouting at his children for whatever reason. One day I heard him shouting, "I don't have time to look after crazy women." It reminded me of Jolene saying that Evelyn would one day break down inside, that when it broke, the house would fall together. I began to prepare my exit. I hid food, water, and the notebook wrapped in thick cloth. I made a map in my head, calculating how long it would take me to get through the bush to the road. I waited for the next Sunday, when Vernon would leave early and the children would be asleep. But Evelyn suddenly took a turn for the worse, and he didn't go. He stayed at home. The tension became a noose around my neck. Then, one early morning, I heard the front door open slowly. I stood up slowly, barefoot, and opened the window. Vernon was carrying something wrapped in a sheet, too big to be a garbage bag, too small to be a mattress. His mind tried to deny it, but his body knew what it was seeing. He put the package in the truck and drove off without looking back. The next morning, Evelyn was no longer in her room. Vernon said he had taken her to the hospital in town, but there were no dirty sheet marks, no smell of fever in the air. The bed was made up, clean and tidy, just like the other times. The children didn't ask anything. I didn't answer what I wasn't asked. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "She's gone too, like the others." And inside, a voice said, "Now it's your turn." But not to disappear, to act. Since that night when I saw Vernon leaving with his body wrapped in a sheet, The world has been soundless for me. It was as if the birds had fallen silent, as if even the wind passed me by without making a sound. Everything seemed distant, muffled, like when you dip your head in the water and the rest of the world becomes noise. Evelyn had disappeared, just like the others, and no one in the house even pretended to be surprised. Her absence became just another empty space between the pieces of furniture. Not a glass out of place, not a strand of hair to remind us that she had existed. That, for me, was the cruelest thing of all. Over the next few days, Vernon began to talk less. He seemed satisfied, like someone who finishes cleaning and sits down to see the floor clean. He looked at me more calmly, as if he knew there was no longer a barrier between him and what he wanted. I walked with a rigid body, ready to run, but inside I was just a knife. Every time he passed me and said good morning, my stomach turned to stone. The children kept pretending to be normal, but I noticed how they avoided crossing me, how they looked away when Vernon spoke too loudly. They knew. Not what, but they knew. And I couldn't wait any longer. I picked up the notebook. I read everything I'd written. The letters were shaky, but the truth was there, raw, painful, made with the sweaty hand of a girl who survived by writing. I wrapped it in a piece of thick cloth, tied it with a piece of jute rope, and hid it in a hole behind the house, near the trunk of the lemon tree. If anyone found it, they wouldn't understand everything, but they would see that there was blood in that soil, and that it wasn't animal blood. I began to gather courage like someone gathering wood for a fire. Every night, I'd leave the room with the excuse of fetching water, and I'd test the back gate. Sometimes it was locked, sometimes it wasn't. One such night, I heard a noise coming from the barn. I stopped, took a breath, tried to pretend it was nothing, but the sound came again. A muffled cry, a child's, or almost. I approached slowly, like someone touching a wound. Inside, hiding among the bales of hay, I found the youngest daughter of the house, trembling with fear. She must have been about 8 years old. Her eyes seemed bigger than her face. "He doesn't like it when we cry," she whispered. I didn't ask her any more questions. I just sat next to her and remained silent. After a while, she fell asleep against my arm, and at that moment, I knew it wasn't just my story. Vernon didn't choose his victims. He picked the weakest, and now, without Evelyn, there was nothing to hold back what was left of his wits. The next day, I made a plan, a simple one, quick and dangerous. I hid enough food for 2 days in a linen bag, tied it around my waist with a handkerchief. I put the remaining money in the sewn pocket of my apron and left the knife inside the long sleeve. I waited for Vernon to come out, but he didn't come out. He said he was going to repair the corral, and he stayed until the whole afternoon, pacing back and forth, as if he sensed that something was moving behind the house. That night, I dragged the chair closer to the door. I stayed awake until the noise of his shoes ceased. When everything went quiet, I waited some more, a whole hour. Then I got up. I took the cloth with the food, tied it tightly behind my back. I slipped the knife into my front pocket. The tip pressed into my stomach, like a reminder that this was real. I left. The corridor floor creaked less than I remembered. Every step was a prayer. I reached the kitchen door. I locked the air in my lungs. I turned the handle slowly. The door opened, but Vernon was there, sitting in the dark with a glass in his hand and the smile I hated most in the world. "Where were you going, miss?" His voice came out soft. My knees almost gave way, but I stayed on my feet. I was just going to get some water. The lie came out dry, flat. He stood up slowly. He put the glass in the sink. He walked towards me. "You lie too badly." The slap didn't come. What came was silence. He stopped a few centimeters from me. The smell of alcohol was strong. His breath was hitting my face. I didn't move. Then I heard a noise. Faintly. A light step behind the door. Vernon heard it too. He turned his head for a second. And it was in that second that I pulled out the knife. The blade didn't even gleam. It just scratched the air. He stepped back. "Are you crazy?" There was no charm in his voice now. It was fear. And his fear fed me. I didn't attack. "If you touch me again, I'll finish what I started." I said that and stepped back. I walked to the back door with a firm hand, without turning my back. I opened it. I got out. I ran. The night swallowed me up without asking where I came from. In the woods, I ran without stopping. The branches cut my skin. The air hurt my lungs. But I didn't stop. When I stopped, I didn't know where I was. All I knew was that it wasn't there anymore. I sat down. I breathed. And I cried. For the first time, I really cried. I stayed in the bush for 2 days. I slept, wrapped in a piece of tarpaulin I found thrown near a broken fence. Food ran out quickly. I had to get water from a stream that ran between the rocks. The mosquitoes never let up. The pain in my legs accompanied me at every step. But the feeling of being away from that house was worth more than any comfort. For the first time since I arrived in that place, my body was my own. No one told me where to step or when to lower my eyes. On the 3rd day, with the sky heavy on my back, I found a road. I stood there, dirty, skinned, and trembling with hunger. A truck driver stopped. He looked at me suspiciously. He asked if I was lost. I didn't answer. I just stared at him like someone carrying a story that can't be explained in words. Then he said he needed to get to Jackson. No, I didn't even know where I wanted to go. I just needed to get out of any place where someone might recognize me. He let me up. He didn't ask too many questions. He just talked about the weather, the deliveries, the bumpy road, and I stood there, mute, looking out of the window, as if the landscape could wash away some part of my soul that was still bleeding. When we reached a town I can't even remember the name of, I got off. I waved thank you. I walked until I found a square, sat down on a bench, and watched the people hurry by, unaware that someone like me existed. It was there that I realized that the world kept turning, even though people were disappearing. The world didn't stop for anyone, and if I wanted to survive, I was going to have to invent a new Bernice, one that no one could bend. I found a corner in a church basement. I slept there with other girls who had also escaped from some nightmare. Each one carried a blank look, a story they didn't tell. We shared dry bread and spoke little. And it was on one of those days that I heard one of them talking about a lady who gave shelter and found work for the younger girls. I went looking for her. I found her. She was a widow called Maybelle. Dark skin, a firm voice, the look of someone who has seen a lot of pain. She looked me up and down and said, "You have fear in your eyes, but you also have a good anger. Stay." I stayed. She taught me how to wash clothes properly, sew the basics, look after children. She gave me a back room, a plate of hot food, and silence when I needed it. She never asked about my past. All she said was, "When you want to talk, talk. But don't rush it. There's pain that needs to boil over before it comes out." And she was right, because for weeks, I could only thank her with work. I washed the floor twice, hung up the laundry without a crease, looked after her grandchild as if it were my own. At night, I would lie down and think about the house, the fence, Vernon's voice. The last time I saw his daughter's eyes, curled up in the barn, it consumed me, because I had run away, but left her behind, and all the others, the ones who didn't make it, the ones who disappeared. The notebook, with all my written history, was still buried behind the house, and that was eating me up. So I started saving money, coin by coin. I swept neighbours' yards, ironed for others, anything that would pay me a little change. The plan was to go back. That's right, to go back. Not to live there, of course, but to get what was mine. The proof, Jolene's voice, my writing, the piece of me that no one had the right to bury. 6 months later, I had enough to pay for a ride to the farm. I went in hiding, without telling anyone. I arrived in the late afternoon. The sky was orange, and the smell of the bush made me feel sick right away. The house was still there, the same, frozen in time. I waited for it to get dark. I jumped over the back fence with my heart pounding in my ears. Behind the lemon tree, I dug with my hands until I found the cloth. It was still there, dirty, wet, but in one piece. I ran back with the notebook pressed against my chest. I couldn't breathe properly until I crossed the road. Back in the city, I locked myself in my room. I opened the package with trembling fingers. The pages were stained with dirt. Some were torn, but most were legible. I read it all, again and again, every line, as if it were someone else writing it. And I cried like a child. I cried for myself, for Jolene, for Evelyn, even for the girls I never even met. The next day, I went to the police station. I handed over the notebook. I said very little. I just said, "There are things in here that nobody wanted to see." The policeman looked at it without interest, but took it. I didn't wait. I left. I had no hope of justice. I just wanted to leave a trail, a warning. A few weeks later, I heard that people had been sent to investigate the site. They found bones, a makeshift cemetery in the back. Vernon was arrested. The newspapers didn't say my name, but I knew, and I slept peacefully for the first time in years. After I handed in the notebook, I never went back to the police station. I didn't care who read it, who ignored it, whether they laughed at my crooked handwriting or threw it away. I did my part. I was alive, which many of the girls there couldn't be. I had given my name without speaking, shouted without a voice, and now I had to take care of myself, as no one ever had. I gradually returned to the world, with the pieces I had left. Maybelle never asked where I went. She just looked at me like someone who has seen the world turn upside down and said, "It's about time, isn't it?" And she went back to sewing. I went back to helping with her boy, with the clothes, with the food. But I was different, not the girl who arrived dirty and mute. Now I had weight in my eyes. Those handwritten lines had given me back the dignity I had been robbed of in the middle of the bush. I owned my story, even if nobody wanted to hear it. Over time, I started writing again, no longer in secret. I took loose sheets of paper, scribbled down memories, sensations, pieces of truth that only I could tell. Maybelle read some of them in secret, and one day she said she should show them to the pastor. These words are a knife, and a knife is also used to cut chains. I kept that in my head. I never thought of showing anything to anyone. I was afraid of opening it up too much and someone using it against me. But I also felt that keeping it to myself was cowardly. Jolene deserved to be remembered by more people than just me. One Saturday, I took some papers to church. I waited for the service to end and went to the back room. Pastor Henry was a small man with a soft voice and a neatly trimmed beard. He read everything in silence, with narrowed eyes. When he'd finished, he looked at me like someone who'd just discovered that the world was dirtier than he'd imagined. "Are you sure about this, miss?" I nodded. "Do you have the courage to back it up word for word?" I nodded again. He put the papers away carefully, said he was going to pray for me. I thought that was it. But the following week, he had everything typed up, and he started visiting some of his acquaintances in the big city. That's when everything changed. A girl showed up one Sunday, dressed in dark blue, with her hair up and a polite manner. She sat with me in the front seat, said she worked in the justice system, but didn't wear a badge. I wanted to know more. I wanted to listen calmly, without judgment. I told him what I remembered, with all the details that hurt even to think about. When I'd finished, she took my hand and said, "We're going back there. But this time, you won't be the one running." They returned to the site with excavators, sniffer dogs, and machines I didn't even know existed. They dug holes. They found things. Bones, scraps of clothing, pieces of fabric just like the gown Jolene was wearing. Evelyn was never found. Vernon denied everything. He said I was crazy, that I was making things up, that no one there had ever been mistreated. But the notebook spoke louder than his voice. The other girls who had been there began to appear, each with their own version, each with the same shadow in their eyes. The trial took place months later. I was called to testify. I walked into that courtroom on shaky legs, but with my head held high. I told everything again, without cutting anything out. The judge looked straight at me. Vernon didn't have the courage to look at me. The newspapers said very little. They only mentioned it as a case of mistreatment in the countryside. Nobody likes to see the truth in print. It's scary, but he was sentenced. Life imprisonment, which is not enough for someone who stole childhoods, silenced voices, and buried people in the dark. Afterwards, I went back to Maybelle's house. She welcomed me with hot coffee and a corn cake. We sat on the veranda and watched the sky darken. No words were spoken, and none needed to be. After that, life went on like a river that finally finds a new bend, slowly, but moving forward. I started visiting schools, I spoke to younger girls. I didn't tell them everything, just enough for them to understand that the world has teeth. That silence protects no one. I opened a small room at the back of the church with the help of Maybelle and the pastor. There, girls came to talk, draw, write. Some just cried. Others said nothing for months. But I waited, because I knew what it was like. Sometimes you just need a corner where your soul can rest for a while. I gave it to them, and I got something back that nobody ever gave me. Respect. Years passed. I saw many flowers sprout from the mud. I've seen girls become women with strength in their chests and sparkle in their eyes. I saw justice done slowly, but done. And I saw my story become part of something bigger, something that could no longer be erased. But there's still one thing I've never told. Even after the trial, even after seeing Vernon disappear behind bars, the weight didn't leave my chest. The nights went on with the same long silence. The pillow was still as hard as ever, and the dream, oh, the dream came the same way, with a choked scream and a door that wouldn't open. Maybelle said it was normal, that scars also itch. They also bother you when the weather changes. But it was more than a nuisance. It was a living memory, nudging slowly just to remind us that not every ending is really an ending. I didn't return to that road for a long time. The land of Shubuta made me sick just hearing its name. But one day, I received a letter. No signature, no address, just a folded sheet of paper in strange handwriting, saying, "She's still there." My body froze on the spot. It took me 3 days to decide whether or not to go. When I told Maybelle, she didn't say yes or no. She just gave me the key to the closet and said, "Take your courage, but don't forget your anger." I put the letter in my bag and hit the road with more fear than I'd had in my entire childhood. I arrived at what was left of the farm at dusk. The undergrowth had taken over almost everything. The iron gate had fallen down, and the shed had become a termite nest. The big house was still standing, but it looked more like a shell than a home. I went in through the back, as before. Every step stirred up memory dust. The hallway still made the same creak. The kitchen smelled of abandonment. I felt like crying, but I didn't let myself. I went to the place where I had hidden the notebook. The hole was covered, but it had been moved. Someone had been there. It wasn't just my imagination. I walked to the barn where I had once met Evelyn's daughter. The gate was leaning, with a loose chain swinging in the wind. Inside, nothing. But in the corner, next to the old bales, a rag doll. Her face faded, her dress torn. It was hers. My heart raced as if it was going to betray me. I picked up the toy with trembling hands, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Light. Creeping across the floor. I turned at once. A figure. Small. Frightened. Hidden. I thought it was a bug, but it wasn't. It was a girl. Dirty clothes. Mussed hair. Eyes. Eyes I hadn't seen for over 20 years. The same as Evelyn's daughter. The same way as someone who had never learned to trust. I whispered her name without thinking. She didn't answer. She just stood there, as if waiting for me to disappear. I tried to approach her slowly. I told her who I was. I told her that I was once a prisoner in that place, that I left, that I came back because I can't leave everything buried. She didn't answer, but she didn't run either. I sat on the floor for hours, talking slowly, like someone cradling sadness in their lap. When it got dark, she huddled close to the wall, still silent, but without moving me away. I spent the night there. The floor was hard, the soft sole. In the morning, she was still there, sleeping with one eye ajar. I went out to the truck, got the bread and water I'd brought. I returned calmly. She had eaten, still silent, but her eyes were no longer the same. They had a spark, a small spark, but alive. I began to understand. She never left. She stayed, hidden, forgotten, perhaps because no one looked, perhaps because no one wanted to see. I spent 3 days returning to the place. Each time she let me get a little closer, until she let me take it outside. I showed her the open sky, the river that ran nearby, the birds that still sang. She didn't seem to know what freedom was, but little by little she recognized it. I spoke to the pastor, to the girl in the blue dress, to everyone who had helped the other time. They said she needed to be taken to a shelter. I said no, that it was up to me now. and I took her home. Maybelle wasn't surprised. She looked at her, nodded. She prepared a bath, food, and a room. The little girl, who now had a real name, Grace, slept for 2 days. Then she woke up hungry. She began to walk around the house like someone treading on holy ground, every plate washed, every book leafed through. It was as if she was saying, "I'm here." And she was, finally. Grace doesn't say much, but when she does, she's precise. Some days she asks about her father. I don't lie. I tell her he's where he deserves to be. She just shakes her head. The first time she laughed was when Maybelle's grandson fell into the basin full of water. A short, almost choked laugh, but it was laughter. And I cried, hiding in the hallway. Life gave way. I was recognized as her tutor. I wrote a book, with everything, from the beginning to the end. I published it simply, on cheap paper, with the cover made by one of the girls from the church. I distributed it around. I never made a penny from it, but I got something bigger. A message came back to me a while later, handwritten. "Now I understand. Thank you." There was no signature, but I knew it. I was one of those who had been through the same thing. There's still pain. There are still nights when I wake up sweating, thinking I'm locked in that windowless room again. But now I have Grace. I have a clean name. I have a past told with my voice, and no one can erase that. The days with Grace were like walking barefoot on hot stone. You go, but you feel everything, every step, every slap, every memory she brought back without opening her mouth. And it wasn't just her who lived in silence. It was me too, because when you survive a place like that, your soul hides even from itself. And I had already learned that you can't force a flower to sprout in dry soil. You just water it, wait for it, protect it. She began to write. Bread paper, a broken pencil, anything would do. She scribbled without form, without rules, but with force. One day, she left a piece of paper on my bed. It had a drawing on it. It was the barn. And in the corner, 2 figures, one standing, the other cowering. It hurt, but it was also liberating, because it was the first time she had put out what she had experienced, without words, but with a trace. And that, for me, was more than a cry. It was a seed. I decided to look for others. Others who, like her, were lost, hidden, erased. I used old contacts, the names I'd written down over the years. I gathered stories. Some came in notes, others in shaky voices on the phone. Each one brought with it a piece of horror reminiscent of my own. And they all had one thing in common. Nobody believed them, or they pretended they hadn't seen it, or they said it was the invention of a tired head. I set up a circle of women, former mute women, former prisoners, each with her own time, her own rhythm, her own way of healing. Some wanted to talk, others just wanted to listen. There were those who came just once and never showed up again. There were those who never left. For a long time, Grace just watched. She sat in the corner, her legs crossed, her eyes attentive, until one afternoon, in the middle of a story about a girl who had been left locked in the basement for 3 days, Grace raised her hand. I saw it. Her voice came out low, but clear. I saw when he took her. No one moved. Time stood still for seconds that seemed eternal. She continued. It was night. He thought I was asleep. The silence after those words was different. It wasn't one of shock. It was one of recognition. Because there, everyone had already been Grace, at some point in their lives. After that meeting, she began to change. She changed her scribbles for sentences, the sentences for little letters. Then she started telling others, and I watched with a mixture of pain and pride, because it was like watching a seedling sprout in soil that no longer expected to bear fruit. And it didn't sprout to flower. It sprouted to grow, to rise, to remind us that there was still time to live with dignity. At that point, I was no longer looking for justice. I had seen enough to know that justice doesn't always come with a robe. Sometimes it comes in the embrace of a stranger, in the letter from someone who says, "Thank you," in the laughter of a girl who once only knew how to cry. And that, for me, was more valuable than any sentence. But one day, I received a phone call. It was from a young lawyer with a firm voice. She had read my book. She wanted to file a class action suit, not to punish someone who had already been locked up, but but to publicly recognize what had been done to us. We want to call it a state crime because it happened to a lot of people, and through the omission of many. I couldn't answer. So many years of trying to erase it from my face. Now they were asking me to come clean. I thought about it for days. I walked around the city, sat on the benches in the square, as I did when I ran away the first time, until I decided, yes, I would accept, not for me, but for all those who remained silent, who died with their screams pierced. I went to the meeting with the other victims. I saw women old enough to be my granddaughter, and others who could have been my sisters, each with a similar but unique story, each with the same hidden mark, and that's when I understood. The whole thing wasn't just about Vernon. It was about the system that allowed Vernon to exist. The process began. The media, journalists, politicians, everything. They tried to minimize it. They said it was old stuff, that it was different today. But we knew better. It was just a new version of the same poison. Grace wanted to testify. She said she had to. And there she went, in front of cameras, judges, microphones. She said his name. She told what she saw. She said she sleeps better today, but she never forgot the sound of the door locking behind her. The room fell silent, just like the barn, when he walked away, laughing. The lawsuit went on for months. There was resistance, of course. There always is. But in the end, we won. They officially recognized what we had been through. They put a name to our pain. And that, for those of us who have lived in oblivion, is worth more than any money. It didn't change the past, but it paved the way for a different future. Grace is studying today. She wants to be a teacher. She says she's going to teach children to speak out, to denounce, to never swallow a cry. I'm still here, old, tired, but firm, with a bookcase full of letters, a room full of history, and a heart that, despite everything, still beats with hope. I woke up that day with a different weight on my back. It wasn't tiredness. It was something else, as if my body was telling me that the time had come to close the door that had been left ajar all my life. I got up earlier than usual. I made coffee, tidied up the house, combed my hair calmly, and put on the blue, flowery dress I'd gotten from Maybelle years ago. It was simple, but it was the only one that reminded me of who I had become after everything. When Grace woke up, she looked at me as if she knew. All she asked was, "Is today the day?" And I said yes, with a lump in my throat that seemed older than my age. We went together. The sun was high, but the wind was cold. We walked slowly, like someone who doesn't want to arrive, but has nowhere else to run. When we arrived at the place, I saw people whose names I couldn't even remember, people who had turned their faces away from me in the past, and now came up to clap. I didn't care. Their wound was different. I just wanted to talk. For the last time. I was called to the microphone. I climbed onto the small makeshift wooden stage, looked at the people, took a deep breath. I hadn't prepared a speech. I've never been one for memorizing words. I spoke about what lived in me, what tore me apart, dried me up, shut me up. I said the names of the girls who passed through that house and never came back. Jolene, Marnie, Tess, Evelyn, little Ruth, who no one remembers. Evelyn's daughter, who now has a name, a home, a voice. Grace was sitting in the front row, eyes shining, chin up. She looked at me as if she saw a tree that had never fallen. I talked about what it means to survive, that it's not living, that it's walking around carrying a patched-up body, a soul sewn together with fine thread, about to burst, that surviving means swallowing your scream and smiling at those who destroyed you, and that, even so, we find a way to plant flowers in the soil where there was only blood. Because women aren't born strong. Women are made. In iron, in fire, in humiliation, and in love too, when it appears, sometimes late, sometimes only after the pain. I finished my speech without applause, just silence, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things, of memory, of truth. I went down slowly. I hugged those who came. I forgave those who needed it. And I left, without looking back, because now I knew the past is no place to live. It's only a place to visit when we need to remember who we are. At home, I sat on the balcony. Grace came and sat next to me. We sat there, quietly, watching the time go by. She took my hand. She squeezed it slowly. She said, "If one day you go, I'll continue." That hurt. But it was beautiful, because it wasn't an empty promise. It was certainty. I saw in her eyes that she was going to carry on, that she wasn't going to let everything fade away with this old woman's last breath. The following week, I received a letter, handwritten, with a crumpled envelope. It was from a girl from out of state. She said she had read my book. She said she'd experienced something similar. She thought she was alone, but after reading it, she decided to tell her mother, and that now the two of them were crying together, laughed together, and they lived. That took me apart. I didn't cry. I smiled, because I understood once and for all that my story was never mine alone. It belonged to everyone. Grace started teaching at the neighborhood school. I would pick her up in the late afternoon. I would sit on a bench outside and listen to the children's laughter. Sometimes I would close my eyes and let that sound wash over my soul. One day, she ran out of the room with a drawing in her hand. It was me, standing up, in a red cape, holding a cardboard sword. In the corner, she wrote, "My grandmother is a warrior." I kept that piece of paper like a medal. I grew older. The body gave way, as is natural. But my head was fine. And the heart, well, the heart was sore but clean. The anger that had kept me alive for so long turned into calm. Not peace, calm, which is different. Peace is when everything is fine. Calm is when you learn to live with what will never be. I never got married. I never had a child. But I had Grace, and she had me. And that was enough. We are enough. Two lives that met in the rubble and decided to make a home for each other. Sometimes she asks me if I would change anything, and I say yes, of course. I wish I'd had a childhood. I wish I'd had a choice. But I also say that if I had to change my path and not have her, then let everything stay as it was. Today, I'm writing this last part with weak fingers. The pen weighs more than it used to, but every word that comes out still has the strength of the girl who never let herself be a child. And yet she became a woman. She became history. It has become a living memory in the chest of those who listen. If you've followed me this far, my dear, I thank you with every bit of my mended soul. Leave a like, not out of vanity, but because every like is a beacon for another woman lost in the dark. Tell me where you heard me from, because this old woman ends her story on her feet, and not alone.